Karen Craggs, and I'm about to blow their minds. All right, nice to see everyone. I flew in from Toronto, so I'm one of the guests here, and I'm so excited and genuinely appreciative of the opportunity and the invitation to share some hopefully useful knowledge that will help you in your practices in addressing gender equality in your work. So for those who are meeting me for the first time, hi, I'm Karen. I like to say I'm nice Karen. So, they always tell me be unforgettable, so there you go. Truly, I am nice. And a few things to know about me. I'm originally from Kenya, a small town called Nakuru. Anyone know Nakuru? It's the Lake of Flamingos. It's the first town in Kenya to have Wi-Fi publicly. It's pretty cool. So I'm originally from Kenya. I've been doing this work for over 24 years. And for me, the reason why this is my calling is because I grew up in a multiracial home. My mom is Gujarati Indian. My father is actually from north of England, and he's part of the colonial establishment that did a lot of damage. And so I feel a personal responsibility as being his daughter to, use my privilege and my space to be able to do something different. I used to say when I was younger, I'm doing this work to change my dad. So for some of us, we do this work because we have really personal experiences that have shaped the way we want to use our voice and our efforts. I also grew up in a home with a Black brother, and so for me, understanding privilege and opportunity to make a difference and also discrimination is highly intersectional for me. I don't separate these issues, and you might see that in my language when we're talking about gender equality. I will move beyond gender equality because I really feel that issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion, issues of truth and reconciliation, they are part of the conversation around gender equality. And one of the things we need to do better is to stop siloing all of these issues as much as we do. Are we taking notes? All right. So we have 90 minutes, and I packed a lot in. Usually I do this in 3 or 4 days of training. I've been very lucky to be doing this in partnership with SCIC in Saskatoon. We're doing a similar workshop over 2 days in Regina. So if you get value out of this and you want to participate in that, if you have funds to fly or drive to Regina, you're welcome to come to that. And I'm hoping that we can do more of these with all the different regional councils as well, because this work is so important. One of the gaps that I'm filling is the fact that we have all these requirements as program writers and in our relationship with GAC and other funders, but a lot of the people writing the programs and filling in the forms don't understand the requirements. And so as someone who was head of business development for the African Institute for Mathematical Sciences, in 3 years I helped them raise over $100 million. We had donors from Germany, the UK, Canada, and many other organizations. I got really, really good at understanding what the heck does FIAP mean and how do we do this. So I'm hoping to give you some key takeaways, and I'm also open to questions. So keep in mind your questions, but I want you to apply what we talk about to your own programs. So I like to know who's in the room. So I'll start by saying, please stand up if you work at an NGO. This is also exercise. All right. Okay, yes. Any NGOs or related organizations? Wonderful. Wow, look at that. Okay, down. Please stand up if you're with a government agency. Okay, wonderful. Thank you. And if you're with any other type of organization. Oh, yes. So who do you represent? Okay. Wonderful. Okay, great. Wonderful. So, and post-secondary, amazing. So one of the things that I feel very strongly about as a development professional who is trained in international development, I went to York University and did international studies, and then I went to LSE and did development management. one of the things that I was really frustrated with was that what we were learning in university around theory of globalization and all these other things, they didn't translate into writing a proposal that landed in funding. So, that was one of the gaps that I noticed and that I learned to fill very quickly for myself in terms of professional skills, but also in terms of what I give back to the community and the sector. So I do a lot of these sessions for university programs and students who really want to understand what does it take to create change. So if you're ever interested in inviting me to your institution to do something like this, I'm really open to that. Okay, so 4 things we're going to cover, hopefully in 90 minutes. The first one is a systems approach to addressing gender equality. The second one is 6 action. Is that me? Yes, it is. 6 priority action areas, and then 3 gender equality outcomes, and then 4 levels of gender integration into programming. So in the room, how many people have taken gender training? Yes. How many people have written anything about gender equality in a proposal? All right, so you're experts in this room. So I hope what I say is correct, and if it isn't, feel free to set the record straight. Okay, and so for whom is this a completely new conversation? Okay, great. All right, so number 1, a systems approach to addressing gender equality issues. This is something that I've done in rural communities in Ghana and in Yellowknife and all over the world. It's also something I've brought to organizations that are sophisticated and complicated like Plan International. And this is huge. Understanding this is huge. So how many people are familiar with this tree? Great. So for the benefit of those who aren't, this is your first lesson in doing this work. When we look at how governments operate when they're doing funding for development work, often we have $30 million. It is for a portfolio on X or Y governance or maternal child health or whatever it is. We're inviting calls for proposals. Is that correct? Yeah, pretty much. So what tends to happen is then as an NGO, we say, okay, well, what's an issue, a measurable issue that we can have impact on within the budget that we're asking for? And let's take that tiny fruit off the tree and go take care of it and then report against it and then say we did amazing because we delivered on it. So I'm going to use a very small example that will show you how problematic that is. Where is he? There he is. Okay, I'll stop doing that. I'll stop doing that. I can't promise. So let's take female infanticide in India. Does anyone work in India here? Projects in India? No? Okay. Yes? Okay, great. So we take female infanticide. Let's say there's a call for proposals. We want to address the issue of female infanticide as part of a bigger portfolio. And so a small NGO might say, okay, we want to apply for this. And maybe they're looking at saving 300 girls from being aborted, right? So there are many things that we can do to achieve that goal, depending on where our organization sits. Maybe we're into legislation. Maybe that's our specialty. Maybe we work with doctors. Maybe we are an advocacy organization. So the initiative that you're going to design is often based on your area of expertise within solving that problem, right? So let's say in this example that the small NGO decides, okay, we are going to save 300 girls from female infanticide, and on the institutional level, that's us, we're going to do it by working with legislators to introduce a law that doctors are not allowed to perform abortions. Okay? And then how do we measure that? Because there's the risk register and the PMF and all of that. So in the PMF, the project management framework, we might say, okay, we're going to measure how many people came to have this performed, and that the doctors turned them away, so that child wasn't aborted. That might be an indicator for us that we're doing this work and we stop those abortions from happening. But when you look at that issue, so that's a very simple approach to doing it. We put in a law which forces doctors not to do it, and so they're not doing it, and we're counting how many people showed up at the office that were turned away. But what do we know about the way social issues work? Whatever is turned from legal to illegal simply becomes underground. So now we might say one of the issues that might happen, which is a new issue on the tree because it is a tree. So first we had 300 babies that were going to be killed. Then we had 300 babies that survived because they were turned away. Maybe of that 300, the woman went to someone else and had it done without anesthesia, without medical training. And so out of the 300, only 200 were not killed. 100 went through that process. Maybe the women died in the process. So now we have 200 girls that weren't killed. But those 200 girls are still living in the same ecosystem that created the issue in the first place. So what are some of the values and attitudes within the community in an Indian context that would lead to female infanticide? What are some of the beliefs about girls? You can just shout it out. Girls are a burden. Girls are a burden. Maybe because, we don't want them to lose their virginity, and the more girls we have, we can't protect them. It's a risk on our reputation. What else?
Prefer boys.
Sorry?
Just prefer sons.
Why?
Carry on the name.
That's right. So we want a son because he stays with us and brings the wife into the family. He carries the name. His children become part of the extended family and labor, on and on and on. Someone was talking about poverty. But you see those values about girls and boys, the things that we don't outwardly speak about, but that drive our decisions in families, in communities, in institutions, in the way laws are formulated. Those are the things that feed the tree and lead to all kinds of fruits that we are trying to address in the NGO sector. So when we're looking at saving 300 girls from infanticide, we have to consider that they're going to now grow up. These 200 girls are going to grow up in a system that still believes that girls are a burden, that still believes that boys are better and more of an asset, that still believes that girls are property in some cases. So what's going to likely happen to those 200 girls? What are some examples of what might happen as they grow up? They might be trafficked. If the family is in severe poverty, we know that the harder things get, the more likely it is for a girl to be married off younger or sold for cows or for cash to help the family survive because they're next in line, right? What else might happen? Yeah, so they might keep them in menial labor. They might just keep them at home and use them as free labor instead of sending them to education. What else? Yes, they might die young, they might be killed, they may not be taken to hospital if they get hurt, so many things. So now these 200 girls that we wrote in our report to GAC that we saved are still living in an environment and an ecosystem that's going to hurt them because we haven't dealt with the roots of the tree. And so when we look at the institutional aspect, the trunk, it's really important as we are assessing the problem and trying to understand what our intervention will be, that we understand that in every context, there are organizations that are our allies in this work, and there are organizations that are equally fighting for things to stay the same. So we need to do the mapping of values and attitudes. We need to do the mapping of organizations that are allies or that are working to keep things the same, or that are benefiting from this inequality. We need to understand those. And we also need to understand what are our naive assumptions about what we're doing and what it's going to lead to. Because the number one thing I've learned in doing 24 years of this work globally is that good intentions are not enough. Social change is very complex. This work is extremely complex, and it involves lives, real people's lives. And when we reduce it into boxes in a logic framework, he's not looking, and we don't understand and do the work around the complexity of this, we cause new problems. So the thing that infuriated me the most was when I was working at an NGO, and we did a program that we wrote was amazing, and then I went to Ghana and talked to the people on the ground, and it was a microfinance project for women. And they'd done the consultations, and the men had said, our biggest issue is that women don't have income. Can you help us create microfinance income opportunities for women? And the women agreed. So we did that, and through village savings loans, they all increased the income they had in the household. So according to the reports and the PMF and everything we promised, we were doing well. But when we talked to the women, the men said, this is great. We now have more money in the community. And the women said, this is the worst thing you could have done for us. This is the worst thing you could have done. And so we asked for more information. How is this? This is what you asked for. How is this bad? They had higher rates of abuse within marriages. They had higher rates of divorce. They had women who were killed. Right? Same thing happened with Grameen Bank. Everybody says Grameen Bank was amazing, but do we talk about what happened, the unintended outcomes of Grameen Bank and the pressure it put on women who were living in homes where the men didn't agree with the terms of borrowing that money, and who put women in situations where they killed themselves because they couldn't pay that money back because of the power dynamics in the household that we didn't address. So my number one thesis is, if you're going to be a change agent, if you're going to do this work, be responsible for both the intended outcomes and understand that there will be unintended outcomes. And the goal is not to not do this work. The goal is to be responsible about how we do it. And a key part to that is gender-based analysis, which is doing our homework before we design the program. Okay, so that was number one. Number two is now based on the Feminist International Assistance Policy. How many people are familiar with that policy? How many people know it really well? Yes. Okay, so everything that I'm telling you is coming from there with a bit of my own experience, but you can pull up the policy and read it and dig deeper if you want. So why do we focus on gender equality? If we're looking at the future, all the conversations yesterday and today were about the future, all the issues that we're dealing with, climate change, war, polarization, food insecurity, all these major global issues that we're dealing with. Why is gender equality so central to addressing all of them? Well, according to FIAP, our vision of international assistance in Canada is a feminist vision, one that says that in order to achieve the eradication of poverty and to build a more inclusive and prosperous world, we must first empower women and girls as part of that. They are critical to that world of prosperity and peace. They are critical, and they give you lots of evidence of, and we heard some of that yesterday as well, so I'm not going to repeat it. But even educating one girl in a family can make all the difference for her and everybody that follows after. So gender equality is central. I'm not going to argue that point, but I'm going to talk about how we deliver on it. So according to FIAP, the Canadian government is funding 6 priority areas. These 6 areas came from 15,000 people being consulted. 65 countries were involved in creating the process that led to the FIAP priorities. So in that consultation, there were 6 areas. Okay? So for each of these areas, there are specific elements outlined that include gender equality considerations. So if you're lost and you work in a particular area, come and look at what they're outlining. So if we take gender equality and women's rights, which is a separate pillar, but it's also a cross-cutting pillar, they talk about things like reducing gender-based violence. It doesn't matter what sector you work in, what region you work in, gender-based violence is prevalent. So you should be treating it as a cross-cutting issue, if not the whole focus of the project, right? Strengthening women's organizations and movements on the ground. We heard about partnerships. The panel that was up here talked about how they were using their resources to elevate the impact and work of local partnership groups that were dealing with women's issues. Improving the government's capacity to provide services to women and girls, and to do gender-based analysis, because one of the ways that we do this work better is to have this work done ahead of time and not when calls for proposals come in. And then working with men and boys, which is a huge part of gender equality work. I can do a whole session just on that. But at the end of the day, it begins by recognizing that inequality and exclusion are the root cause, as we saw in the tree, of many of the issues that we're trying to deal with. So there are 6 of these. Human dignity talks about healthcare. I want you to think about your organization, okay? So which organization, who here works on gender issues like women's rights and women's empowerment? Okay, great. Who here works on human dignity, which is healthcare, nutrition, education, and humanitarian action? All right, great. Who works on economic opportunity? Wonderful. Who works on environment and climate action? Awesome. Who works on inclusive governance? Great. And peace and security? Awesome. Okay. So we see that these thematic areas are relevant to all of you, and one of the things that you can do is go back and review what are the pieces that they've already outlined in the FIAP policy around each of these areas. Are we addressing them? Are there gaps in what we're doing and how we're analyzing these issues? Because we haven't looked at these more closely. So the other thing, so that was point number 2. We're doing 4, right? Where are we at on time? I'm steaming through. Okay. So the third point is this piece around what is gender equality. Because if I asked you, does everyone understand gender equality? Who understands gender equality? Hands up, hands up. What? Who doesn't understand gender equality? 101, it's not just about women and for women. Okay, let me just say that up front. Gender equality is not just about women and it's not just for women. Gender equality is about, like, if you think of an ocean, all the fish swim in the ocean, right? Gender equality is about changing the elements of that ocean, that water that we swim in, because those socialization rules that affect women also affect men and non-binary people. And so, yes, women have historically been left behind in many ways, right? Whether it's equal pay, not enough positions in leadership, not being able to own property, not having the freedom to walk in your own country outside, not being able to speak if you're in a country like Afghanistan. Like, yes, women have very specific, historically, noted and brought out issues, but gender equality is not just about that. That work, if we're just focusing on women, is about women's empowerment. But to achieve women's empowerment, we need to address gender equality, and to do that, we need to engage men and boys, and we need to address the issue of non-binary communities and the issues that they experience, and we need to do it holistically. So, we always say, and when I ask what is gender equality, organizations will read out their policy. So gender equality, according to GAC, refers to equal rights, responsibilities, and opportunities for women, men, and non-binary people. Equal rights, responsibilities, and opportunities. What does that mean? How do you program around equal rights, opportunities, and responsibilities? I'll tell you how. I should have my own comedy show. So this is how GAC answers the question, how do we program around it? What do we mean when we talk about gender equality? It breaks it down into three pillars of, three types of outcomes. Okay, so in order to achieve gender equality, we are protecting and promoting human rights for women and girls. That's bucket number one. We are increasing participation in decision-making of women and girls in spaces where they are historically excluded. And we are enabling women and girls to have equitable access and control over resources. So what's the first one? Just give me the keywords. What's the first one? Human rights, protecting human rights. What's the second one? Participation and decision-making. And note, participation does not equal decision-making. I have a whole framework on that. Number three, what's the third one? Access and control. And access does not equal control. Again, this is all part of my training, right? So three outcomes, really important. When we say we're addressing gender equality, your program needs to clearly state, is it doing 1, 2, or 3? Usually you're doing at least 1, sometimes you're doing 2 out of the 3. You need to be able to formulate that and say it clearly, because then GAC can roll it up as well, right? One of the things they're looking at is like, okay, have they done the thinking? Do they understand our thematic areas? Do they understand the issues that they're addressing? Do they understand which of the 3 buckets they're filling? If you put that in, you make it really easy for them to see that you understand what FIAP is and you understand how you're doing this work. So now we're talking about another piece. So we take those outcomes, those 3 buckets, and they have a framework that outlines 10 sub-outcomes. Sub-outcomes. So for each of those 3, for human rights, because you could be saying, Karen, I want to do protection of human rights for women and girls. What does that even look like? Well, GAC has given you the answer. It's either strengthening the legal system or working with the legal system. It's raising public awareness about women's rights, or it's in response to rights violations, like what's happening in countries that we're aware of, where sex is used as a tool of war, for example, or trafficking, right? So they've given you the different elements that fall under each of those 3 buckets. So for participation in decision-making, you could be raising the capacity for women to participate in public office. You could be increasing the representation of women in different bodies as decision makers. You could be supporting household and individual decision making, where, remember what I said, when the women had the money, what happened to them? Right? They didn't have the skills to negotiate, and we didn't bring the men in early enough to make a difference. So we could be working on that. When we're looking at access and control, we're talking about livelihoods and productive assets. In many countries, women are not allowed to own bank accounts. They're not allowed to buy things in their own name. The inheritance law works against them, right? So livelihoods and productive assets. You could be a beekeeper, a honey maker in a country, but maybe you don't know how to turn that honey into a profitable product that has higher value. And so you get stuck as the woman doing the farming, and somebody else takes the benefits of processing that honey and turning it into something of higher value. So, that's part of that. And then developing institutional capacity. So you might be working with the government to help them understand how do we deliver on gender-based analysis before we make, huge policies in countries. I've worked with ministries in different countries where their policy just made me shake my head. I'm like, how did you get to this? Because I can tell you already that it's not right. Okay, policy change and then well-being. So I was in St. Lucia. I was in St. Lucia doing some work with all the ministries in St. Lucia. And one of the things that came up under policy change, it still makes me laugh, is that they have a policy against sodomy. They have a policy against sodomy. It's law. It's law. And when we were talking about inclusion for LGBTQ communities, they're saying that sodomy policy was put into place in a time and a context where it was about women and men. Right? So because it's law, even if they're opening up and they're more inclusive and they're more understanding and they're more flexible and they have tourists coming from these different demographics, if that law doesn't change, it's constantly a threat. I don't care what your prime minister tells me. I need to know what the law tells me. Right? So sometimes the culture has to catch up with the law, and sometimes the law has to catch up with the culture. So these things are important. Okay. So if we put together, if we put together, we have 6 thematic areas. We're following, right? 6 thematic areas. And then we have 3 types of gender equality outcomes. So that means for each thematic area, you could have 3 different types of outcomes. I could be addressing, let's take economic growth for everyone. I could be doing a project on promoting women's rights in economic growth. I could be doing a project in increasing their participation in decision making. Or I could be doing a project that deals with access and control to certain resources to support economic growth, right? Or I could be doing a project that does 2 or 3 of these. But I need to be able to clearly outline in every proposal I write what I'm doing and how it fits. And also, if I was, heading an organization that was doing this kind of programming, I'd do this as our own mapping. Our own mapping. If we have 19 programs, how do they fit? Which thematic areas and what areas of gender equality are we addressing in these buckets? It's good to review. Okay, now we're at the last one. And then we'll have some discussion. Okay, so 4 levels of integration. So we talked about 6 themes. We talked about 3 gender equality outcomes, how we define gender equality and what change looks like. Now we're going to talk about how do you integrate it in programs, because there's 2 types of programs that we deal with. Programs that are already done, they're sealed and done. We can't do anything about them, but we have to deliver on them in the next few years. And then there are programs that we're about to write. Who's about to write a proposal? Who's about to do something soon in the next 6 months, something new? Right. So this is your opportunity to implement what you learn in what's new, while also understanding where you could have done better with what already exists or what's already closed, right? So how many people are familiar with the scorecard framework that GAC has on gender equality in programming? Yeah? You should all be familiar with it. If you're getting funding from GAC, you should be familiar with this. Okay? So I could say there's 3 types of programs, but let's face it, there's 4. So the first one is no gender equality lens at all. Gender blind. Does anyone have an alternative word for gender blind? I was looking this up yesterday because I don't like using that word in this context. But I don't have a better word, so we'll just go with it for now. So gender blind, gender equality is not integrated into the program outcome. Okay? Statements treat populations, diverse populations, as homogeneous. So an example is increased graduation rates of students in high school. Do we see that? Do we see how it's gender blind? What's the gender blind part of that statement? Students. What do we know about students? They're diverse, right? We have girls, boys, non-binary, people with disabilities. There might be, different ethnic groups. There might be marginalized communities, undocumented, refugee status. So when we take any population, if your program is dealing with anybody, any human being, you need to be doing this. If you're doing gender blind work, I'll smack you on the head. Oops, I'm not allowed to do that. My kids always tell me, you're not allowed to do that. Cut that out of the video. So, if we're dealing with populations, we don't want to be gender blind. Yes? Okay. So how many people are familiar with levels of change, the change framework? Yes. So we all know, what are inputs?
Money.
Yes, that's a very important input. Money, staff is another one, right? We have the money, we don't have the staff to deliver. So inputs are things that it's the ingredients that we make the cake with, right? Your milk, your eggs, your money, your staff, your whatever it is to do the work that you're doing. Next level is outputs. How are we combining those ingredients to create activities? Activities. Activities are things that we do. So we tell GAC, for $300,000, we're going to do this training, we're going to host this conference, we're going to whatever it is we're doing. Those are activities, right? The next level is outputs. What happened when I completed that activity? Oh, we delivered the training, we delivered the conference, we had the workshop with Karen, right? Those are outputs. What's that? With nice Karen. Yes, thank you for remembering. The next one is immediate outcome. So what happened because of that workshop? Karen came here and spoke blah-de-da-da. What happened? What happened because of what she did? Something must have happened. Maybe the quality of your proposals got better. Right? What is the immediate thing that happened as a result of you being here? Increased understanding of FIAP policy. That might be the outcome, right? It's directly related to the output. And it's short term. And then intermediate is the next level up. So if we do a couple of other activities along with Karen's workshop, what happens? Well, maybe, as I said, maybe the quality of the input that GAC is receiving is better. So he's happy with us and we get more money. And then, and so. It's about the change takes, as we go up this ladder, change takes longer, requires more inputs, and there are more variables that might affect our outcomes, right? It's all based on assumptions. The part that we're dealing with when it comes to putting together what we've just talked about is in immediate outcomes, intermediate outcomes, and ultimate outcomes. So I mapped it against the scorecard. So if you see, there's partial, fully integrated, and targeted. Okay? I'm going to explain what they are. And then I'm going to quiz you all. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. I've been doing this for a long time, so don't worry if you don't get all of it. Okay. So partial, gender equality. When it's partial, what does it mean? So we know gender blind means everything is about generalizations, right? So partial, there's at least one gender equality outcome at the immediate outcome level. So immediate means small stuff, not big changes, right? So we did an activity, it led to some kind of outcome. Karen talked and we loved it. Okay. So it leads to, the type of change it leads to is change in skills, awareness, and knowledge. We now understand FIAP's policy, right? Small changes. An example, increased awareness of girls' rights to education and their benefits, the benefits of girls going to school. So maybe, in the first one, it was like, oh, we just want more kids to graduate or participate in high school. In the second one, it's a little clearer. Well, we want to work with families so that they understand that girls have the right to education and that it's a good thing for their girls. So what have we done? We've developed skills, awareness, knowledge. We've increased their awareness of girls' rights and their knowledge of the benefits of education for girls, right? So the next level, gender integrated, and by the way, the more of this you do, the higher up the ladder you go, the more likely you are to succeed in funding. That's why this is relevant, because it leads to money. Show me the money. Okay, so you want to do either 2 or 3. Okay? So 2 there's at least one intermediate outcome. So usually in a project management framework or a logic model, you'll have 3 or 4 pillars, usually 3. One of those entire pillars should be about gender equality. You're addressing some gender dimension of your problem. So if it's food security, one of your pillars should be about gender issues within food security. If you're dealing with maternal child health, well, that's all about women and gender equality, right? If you're, where's Engineers Without Borders? If you're building a bridge, one of those pillars needs to deal with the issue of gender dimension within that work, right? So it contributes to a different kind of change. So instead of awareness and skills and understanding, we're now leading to a different change because we're doing more activities around this. It leads to a change in behavior, practice, and performance. So not only did, we pay for Karen's flight and hotel so she could come here and hang out with us, and she delivered a great session, and the session was great, and so many people turned up, and Sandra's really happy. But the next level is change in behavior. So what happened now that you had an increased awareness of FIAP's policy? Well, there were more submissions with better gender analysis in them. Okay, so that's an outcome, a change in behavior, right? So to do a change in behavior, to do that level of gender equality work, you are including activities. So you're already doing outputs. Okay, so this is the third type, or no, this is the last type, the fourth type. So this is targeted programming, and not all programming will be this. I just want to be clear. Not all programming will be this. It will either be this or 2 is your goal. So this is where gender equality is the principal objective of your program. The only reason that program exists is to address gender issues in a particular context, right? So the initiative was designed to address gender inequalities. It would not exist otherwise. All outcomes are about gender equality, all 3 of your pillars, all your activities, all your outputs, every result level is about addressing a gender equality issue. For example, reduce gender barriers for girls in STEM education. It's not about students in high school. It's about STEM education and addressing the gender gap for girls' participation. So if you think about the different pillars of work, what are some things we might do to solve that longer-term problem? How might we reduce gender barriers for women and girls in STEM education? I need to make you work harder. How might we reduce gender barriers for women and girls in STEM education? Yeah, maybe we increase scholarships to science-based programs. Mentoring? Yeah, maybe we set them up with a mentorship program with actual scientists. Yes, we heard scholarships there and here. Yep. Childcare, if they're burdened with children, yes. Early literacy around STEM, or in general? Around STEM, perfect. Yeah, so we might need to do more work around why STEM education. I did some work in Cameroon on STEM education, and the ministry was saying we support it, but when I went into the actual colleges where teachers were taught how to teach mathematics, they didn't believe that girls should be in STEM. These are math teachers, science teachers, chemistry teachers. They used to say, don't answer, just sit down, you're going to get married anyway. And I sat in classes where the teachers who are becoming teachers were not only taught like that, they actually believed it. And then I went further down the line to talk to girls that had gone through all of that and still chose science. And I asked them, what were you up against and what made the difference and why did you choose it? And it was so interesting to hear the factors that influenced their ability to be resilient in that space and to make that choice and to succeed. And one of the things that we don't talk about enough is the cost of doing this work. So if I want this beautiful girl who's smart and intelligent and amazing, and I worked with many, many of them across Africa, if I want them to do this work, I have to understand the context that they're doing it in. So I can be brilliant, but if I'm in a room full of 30 boys from all over Africa, because we did a Pan-African program, and most of them think that I don't belong there, I'm probably going to get sexually harassed, I'm going to get teased, I'm going to get bullied, I'm going to, I'm not, some of us compensate. I had one girl say, I don't wear makeup because I don't want them to see me as feminine. You know, somebody else accepted that they were just never going to get married because their family kept telling them, if you do this, there'll be no man who will want you at home as a wife. Like, there are costs to liberation. There are costs to this thing we call gender equality. And that needs to be something we map out, we understand, and we address in our programming, right? So in the case of male teachers, it wasn't just about change the textbook that I'm using to teach other teachers. It was, I need to get in there and help men deconstruct why they think like this, right? And if you haven't done that and put it in your proposal, guess what? You don't have money to do it. So that's why we need to fully understand what work is required to create meaningful change. I would rather you do smaller projects with a more specific community and you do them well than you try and do bigger over more space and you don't have the resources to do it well. Because you will hurt people in the process. This work comes with risk. Okay. So, summary. 4 types of gender integration into programs. The first is gender blind. The second is change in what? Change in awareness, skills, and knowledge. The third type is change in behavior, practice, or performance. And the last type, which is a unique type of program, it is not the best, it is one of the 2 types we should be doing. You have, it exists to address what? Gender inequalities. And you can do an entire project that's all working with men and boys in order to achieve equality for girls and women and men too, right? Does that make sense? Okay. I need a beer. Okay. Okay. So review. We talked about a lot very quickly. I don't even know how much time I have. I have a lot of time, don't I? I have a lot of time. 20 minutes? Yeah. So we did a systems approach. What did we learn from the systems approach? Yes. We got to look at the underlying values that are feeding the tree. What else did we learn? Yes. Beautiful. We don't want to just focus on the measurable issues. We need to understand what creates them because likely they lead to other issues as well, right? What other things did we learn?
Take responsibility for the unintended as well.
Beautiful. That we're looking at both. And that's why as much as people hate the risk register, it is my best friend. Okay, so when we do the risk register, that's where I go, did I think this through? What assumptions have I made? And what am I doing to plan for things that might go wrong? And the only way I can answer that well, instead of a copy paste, which a lot of people do from old proposals, you know why I want $100 million? Because I did not copy and paste. If you're copy and pasting into your sections, you should stop. Start your proposal from scratch. Answer every section with a genuine, aligned answer that is fully relevant to that project. The issue of efficiency that we raised with GAC, the efficiency is important, but what's more important is getting it right. So don't copy paste. That's why I ended up being head of business development, even though I was just a gender advisor, because I didn't copy and paste. I went looking for answers. Okay, so what did we learn about the 6 priority areas? What are some things that you learned about the 6 priority areas in FIAP? You're like, what 6 areas? That there are 6. I go pretty basic. Yes, that there are 6, they exist, and we know what they are. What else? That's right. Oh, you are on the ball, Janice. She's done this many times. Yes, that it's cross-cutting and it's an independent pillar, which means we don't get away with it if we don't integrate it into every other type of program we're doing. If you are doing any program and it doesn't have a gender lens, talk to me because you are messing up. Full stop. Okay? I would rather give you my time and help you see what you don't see than you go out there and do something that's wrong, because I didn't get into this business to mess things up. And you didn't either. So if you don't know what you're doing, find somebody who does. You know, one of the things that frustrates me about leaders in this work is that they would rather save a few $1,000s or like cut off an extra week in the field or whatever it is they're doing because they're trying to stick to budget or they're trying to be efficient or they're trying to get in that proposal. And all of the things that we do that create problems in the process, we're part of it. We're part of the problem because we say yes to it, because we allow it, because we stay until 12 o'clock at night when you should be going home and getting rest. Right? The way we do this work is as much a problem as the templates. So where are you short on your integrity? I always said to every boss I've ever worked for, I don't work for you. I work for the people in the community that I go to and I partner with. That's who I work for. That's who I'm responsible to. Not the paycheck you give me. I can get that anywhere. And I've walked away from contracts. I've walked away from organizations. I've called out organizations. I want to be a friend, but it's more important to me that I maintain integrity. And you are in your full right. If you need permission, I'll give you the permission to have these difficult conversations. To say maybe the answer here is a no. No, we're not doing this. Because it would be worse to copy and paste and put in a proposal without having consulted on the ground. So we're not going to do it. Right? This yes mentality creates problems. Okay, so that was the 6 priority actions. What did we learn about the 3 outcomes? You said you didn't know what gender equality was. He's like, oh, darn it. So what do you now know about gender equality as from the perspective of GAC?
I'd say my initial sometimes felt like a general idea, but not too specific. But I feel like this helps you put it into practical terms and just overall the importance of integrating it. Just making some notes of, for example, we have this project in Haiti where the majority of our staff are women, the majority of the clients we serve or the patients we serve are women.
Yeah.
We make these assumptions about the positive impact, but we've never actually driven down below the surface to see what potential negative outcomes might be hidden below that. So I don't know if that fits into the 3.
That's great. You kind of hit all of them.
My take-home message from this is to dig a little deeper, even where on the surface level things could appear.
Yes. Love it. You get a gold star. Yes, it's so important. So at minimum, gender equality isn't a fluffy concept. It actually boils down to 3 buckets. And everything that we do should fit in 1 or 2 of the 3. We don't want to do everything. Your project should focus. But there's a way that we can quantify and break down what gender equality means. And as you were saying, a different point, but an important one, dig deeper. Right? And then the last one, 4 levels of gender integration into programs. What did we learn? That there are 4. I love you guys. Yes, the goal is 2 or 3. Yeah, skip 0. Find another word for gender blind. That's homework. What else? Targeted? Yeah. Yes. Because sometimes people read it as that's the goal. And you can't fit it in where it doesn't fit. Right? So we want to get better where it should get better. And we also want to recognize that that doesn't work in every particular project and context. And so where it needs to be the focus it is, and where it doesn't, it doesn't. I've had people say to me, Karen, I've stayed up all night. I've been in your workshop for 4 days. I've listened to everything you've said. I still can't figure out how to fit this into my project. And I'm like, well, you're dealing with some processing of a machinery, something, maybe it doesn't fit. But do the homework to figure that out. Right? Questions. Wow, I did that in record time. I was worried that this was too much information for you. Actually, it's because I skipped the exercises. I was going to make you do this work yourself. Okay, so we have a bit of time, so I would love to have a dialogue, and it could be about anything. Could be about my general experience, could be about a project you're working on, it could be a question on the presentation. Let's just talk. Could be some advice for GAC. Oh, yes. You can. Yeah, you had the mic, so we'll start with you.
So I work both in overseas contexts, but also more particularly here.
1 second. Can everyone hear?
Oh,
okay.
Sorry. Anyway, so I work often on contract consulting, but most of the work that I do here is at home around settlement and social integration of marginalized groups. So temporary foreign workers, people without status, immigrants, refugees, etc. So one of the dilemmas that we have, those of us who work in the sector, is when we're getting our funding both at a provincial but also at a federal level, is very often the granting process and the language, everything. It's very nice that it's all happening at an international level, but it's very blind. So for me, I'll give a very specific example right now. I've worked for 2 years up in the conflict zone in Ukraine. Came back and I'm now involved in doing settlement and social integration of the temporary foreign workers here. They're here on 3-year work permits, 3-year visas. And all of the programs around settlement are absolutely gender blind. So we've got women who are arriving who are excluded from the workplace over and over and over again. I have had endless conversations with government. I've had endless conversations with my peers. And what happens is that you can't bring it up because everybody is so very much focused on the idea that you need to just get money, any money, to be able to help. So to slow down the conversation or to ask the government or any other funders to be really specific about the need to look at these issues, because very practically for us, we're dealing with issues now for families. We're dealing with domestic violence, a whole wide variety of issues that come as that pre- and post-migration trauma arises up. And people, women in particular, are excluded from the workplace, or exactly what you're talking about, that I think people here a lot of the time don't understand in working with diverse communities, is that we have families where that gender balance, once the women are working, threatens what were traditional gender roles, and so you have more and more issues. So how do we, so to me, this is not just at that international level. This is something that filters through all levels of government, but all levels with funders, foundations, everything. But at that local level, where people are so desperate to find money, they don't want to spend the time to do this. So how do we address that?
First of all, I think this lady needs a round of applause from all of us. Honestly, because I think, so you said a couple of things that really resonate with me. The Canadian approach to doing this work around feminist international development work, even before it was called that, I was doing this. And it was leading the way for everybody internationally. And then I would go overseas to work on programs, being a proud Canadian who was leading the way in this work. And people would say, "What are you doing at home?" And I'd say, not much really. So I chose to change my direction when my kids were younger. And I chose to do more of this work locally. And I chose to work with government agencies here, in Ottawa in particular, but federal agencies, to build their capacity. What we do know, here's what I know, is that gender equality and gender-based analysis in particular is a country-wide commitment from the government. Every public servant has to go through training. Every major initiative has to have this as part of their memorandum to cabinet and their assessment of huge policies and programs and funding envelopes. So I think the work is starting locally, domestically, but I think we can't wait for that to be filtered into requirements for funding. I think it has to be a bottom-up, a top-down, convening conversations like this for your communities in particular, those who work with immigrants, those who work with other types of Canadians, right? And I think it will take a while, but we need to come together and raise awareness and tell stories of why this matters, what's falling through the cracks. And anytime I stand up in front of a room and I say, this is not a joke. This is not a paycheck for me. I'm serious. Here's an example of this woman that our program failed. Here's another example of this man that our program failed. Here's an example of this child that our program failed. And you know what? We're letting it happen. And when we start talking like that, people sit up. But I think you are fighting a good fight in a very difficult situation. And I would say we need more people like you in that space. And you need to find others who do that work. And I can support you in creating larger conversations around it. But yeah, the issue of let's just get in whatever will get funded is a problem. We need to work with other agencies who are getting funded. And I would use the federal mandate to say, you know what, this is part of your mandate. So how are we funding this work? How are we doing this? Right?
If there's anybody here from the GOA, we would love to talk to you.
Yeah. Who's the GOA?
Government of Alberta.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I thought it was like some dating site or something.
Sorry,
Okay.
down to 1 month.
Yes, there's a hand here and then a hand there and then someone over there. Yes. Yes.
So working with men and boys has become quite important that we realize we're working with women, but we also need to work with men and boys.
Yes.
Like we're starting to look at, so what are some of the ways? Anybody got any experience about that?
Yes. I love to say I love men and boys. I really do love men and boys, but mostly men. No, I just have, no, but it's so important. So I did this project. I'll just give you one example. But I did this project in Ghana, and it was with UDS, which is a university institution, and they were partnering with a Canadian agency, and they were getting money, and we had to check the Canadian box for social impact assessment and gender. And so we were training executive directors from a number of different leading organizations in Ghana. And the second I stood up to speak about gender equality, I had my hour or whatever, all the men were like, oh God, there goes the Canadian talking about gender equality again. So you know what? I just shut my laptop, and it was a room full of men. And I said, we're not doing this the way you expect me to do this. We're going to talk about gender equality and you. And then they're like, well, what do you mean? We don't have any problems. I'm like, yeah, let's unpack that for a second. So I said, so in every country we have gender roles. That's part of your mix, is understanding gender roles, gender socialization, and the boxes that people are supposed to fit in, because the boxes are part of the problem, right? So in this case, with these lecturers, I said, okay, so when we talk about gender equality, there's always somebody who has power and somebody who doesn't. So in this case, you have power? Yes. What does that look like? What kinds of decisions are you able to make with that power? Well, I can decide, how many wives I can have. Anyone from Ghana? Yes? How many wives do you have? No judgment. That's exactly right. So they were like, we can have as many wives as we want, we can drive as many cars as we want, we can buy the house, we decide everything. We're the head of the household, okay? Very clear on their power, very macho approach to understanding. Okay, so I said, great. Now, what does that power cost you? And I want the men in this room to think about this. You have a lot of power as a man, especially if you're here as a man from another country, and now you have the elevated status of being a successful man in this country. What does that power cost you? Because nothing is free. So in this story, I asked a room full of Ghanaian men who didn't respect me, didn't want to hear from me, thought I was going to shove, Western ideas down their throat. And then I asked them, what does this power that you're so proud of cost you? And they sat silent, just like you. And then I said, we're not going for lunch until somebody speaks. So I started thinking a bit harder, okay? And then somebody stood up, and he said, there's a younger guy in the room, and he stood up and he said, you see my suit? I said, yeah, you look great. He goes, now look at my shoes. And he lifted his shoe up, and he had holes in the sole of his feet. So it's all about appearance. And all the men started laughing. And he goes, you know why I have holes in my shoes? I said, no. He said, because my wife drives a Lexus and a BMW. I'm like, I don't understand. And he said, my measure as a man is determined by the kind of car I can put my wife in. That's an expression of machismo right there. What it means to be a man in that conversation, in that context at that time, was what kind of a car can I put my wife in? To the point where I have no money for shoes. Okay? So I said, okay, great. This is a really good example of what it costs you to be a man. So for your appearance and for your power and for your privilege, what are you doing to make that happen? Well, I borrow from my cousin because my salary is not enough. I steal from somebody else. I have another job, which means I'm exhausted. I'm never home. X, Y, and Z. He's stressed out all the time. he's cutting corners on other things so that his wife can. So to maintain that image, it's costing this guy so much. And the funny thing is, not so funny, it cost every single man in that room. They were all like, yep, 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 you should see what I have to do to keep my wife in that car. And then we took that conversation to another place. We talked about being in the household, and we talked about how, one guy stood up and he said, you know what, I lived with a single mother, and in Ghana, men don't cook in the kitchen, but I had a single mother and she wanted me to learn, and I love cooking, and she taught me how to cook. I was the exception. He said, I got married to this beautiful woman. She's educated, she's smart, she can't cook. He said, I haven't eaten well in 5 years. He's like, I'm telling you, look at me, I'm thin. Look at all these guys, and I'm thin. So we were laughing, but it was a serious point. And I said, okay, so if we're not looking at this from cooking is a woman's job, if we're looking at it as cooking is something every household should do, and one of us is better and more passionate, and if it's you, you should be in the kitchen cooking, and then we'll both eat and we'll both be happy, how would that change things for you? He goes, oh my gosh, I'd save so much money. I'd stop making excuses for why I'm late out at work because I don't want to eat her food. Right? And he'd say, you wouldn't believe it. Like if I go in the kitchen even to get a glass of water, she comes at me with a spoon. Get out, because what will the neighbors say? What will the neighbors say that you are in here cooking? It means I'm a bad wife. So you see how we reinforce these silly stereotypes that are actually for us, they feel like life and death. What will my neighbor say? I had this conversation with a Canadian NGO. We had the entire staff. We went through this whole thing. And by the way, they were Christian. There's another level to that conversation. Okay? But when I raised the question of what does it cost you to be a man in your own context, the CEO stood up. And he said, Karen, I have a back injury. I have a really serious spine injury. I go for treatment for years. I've been going for treatment. He goes, I hate winter because I have to go out and shovel. And my wife has told me many times, I'll go out and do it, don't worry. And he said, I cannot, for the life of me, allow her to be outside shoveling my driveway. What will the neighbors think? And I said, interesting. So you're educated, you live in Canada, you have rights, you understand this whole conversation, and what are you doing? You're not accepting help because it's associated with your image of what it means to be a man. Right? So this is what I'm saying. This work is not about women only. If we want men to be healthier, going back to your example, we did some programming in Colombia. And in Colombia, who dies younger, men or women? Why do men die younger? Stress? Riskier jobs? Violence, more violence against men. Yeah, I don't need to go see a doctor. In fact, my husband says that quite a bit. He won't even take Tylenol. Got to check his masculinity out. But so we did research. Plan International did research, and we published a report on this around the time I was there. And what we realized was that in order to address gender issues, they have to be contextual, and we have to understand that sometimes the issue is affecting men more than women, or men in a different way from women, but it's the same tree. Okay? So in the case of Colombia, younger men were involved in gangs, they were carrying guns, they were doing drugs, they were involved in riskier behavior, and this wasn't an accident. It was what you got to do to be a man. It's what you got to do. And we were losing men left, right, and center. So if we wanted, to deal with issues of violence against women in a context that's highly machismo, that's highly drugged up and highly risk-oriented and all of this stuff, we got to work with the men too. And I'll take that now to Yellowknife, and then I'll pause for another question. But again, I worked with most of the status of women offices across Canada before they were all closed. I had all the programming staff come to get trained by me, all of them, one by one, every office. And this was a major issue that they didn't get until we had this conversation. So in Yellowknife, around the time of the 100th International Women's Day, I was asked to go there and deliver the keynote speech in Yellowknife for the Government of Canada, or Government of Yellowknife, and then to do a session like this with community and other agency staff, and then something else. But one of their questions was, Karen, let's say their status of women office. So they're like, the number one gender issue affecting us in this Indigenous context is violence against women, right? We know that that's a major issue for Indigenous communities, most Indigenous communities and others. So what they were doing is they were getting funding, and a lot of that funding was about raising awareness. So first they would go down the road, on December 16th or whatever. Violence against women is wrong. Violence against women is wrong. Then they're like, we should go where the men are, because the men are not coming to us. So then they were going to the factories and the warehouses and the bars. And violence against women is wrong. Violence against women is wrong. Now the men are going, oh, give me another beer. Okay? So, but this is what they were doing. And they're like, we don't understand why we're not having impact. So I said, okay, so let's look at this. So you're in an Indigenous community. If I look at the men, what are they struggling with? Well, many of them had been in residential schools. Many of them had been raped themselves. Many of them had watched their friends and their family members and their communities, go through trauma that we can't even talk about. And they were living in a context and a culture where they had to toughen up. Survival equals not feeling things. Survival equals putting bread on the table. Nobody wants to hear you whine about the fact that you watch your sister get raped in front of you. We don't even have that conversation. It's not politically correct to have that conversation. Okay? So and I know this really well because I learned a lot about this from my father. Because he grew up in a time where he was in such a tight box that it turned him into a monster. And because I loved my father, even though he was a monster, I chose to figure out how to reach him. Because I had a stake in it. But in this case, these Indigenous men that were perpetuating the violence had their own histories, had their own trauma, had their own stuff happen to them that was unresolved, undealt with by Canada as a whole and within their own communities. And then they had the added pressure of trying to find, work and shelter and all the other things that are not readily available in those communities. So alcoholism, drugs, these are all escapes. And who's the first person that gets the brunt of that? The women and children at home. Okay? So again, go back to the tree. If we want to address women and girls being hurt by men who are drunk and angry and drugged up and frustrated and, traumatized as hell, we better start dealing with that. And I hear from a lot of people, when I do this work, I hear from people saying, oh, that's not fair. That just means we're giving men the resources. Not if we're doing it to help men and help women. Then we're giving gender equality the resources, right? So how are we framing the work that we're doing and the way we're trying to help people? And this changed everything for them. So they started thinking about, how do we partner with groups that are helping men heal? How do we create conversations and safe spaces for men? How do we support a holistic approach to healing? And I remember this woman came up to me afterwards. She was an elder in the Indigenous community, and she said, how do you have so much wisdom at such a young age? Because this was 10 years ago. And you know how I had that wisdom? Because I lived it with my own family. And what I chose to do was interrogate it, understand it, find ways to create change at home and in me, and then just take it up to scale. So like what I say, wrapping up, are you standing up to wrap me up? Okay. So what I say all the time, I say a couple of things all the time. One is good intentions are not enough. We are responsible for the shit we cause. Number two is that this work starts with us. When I say no to something because it's bad business, it's a bad way of doing it, I mean it. When I say go home and deal with your abusive father, I mean it. When I say have that conversation with your son about how he treats his sister or your wife, have it. We're so quick to do this work over there. But if we can't figure out how to have that conversation, how are we going to help the woman in the village in Ghana? If you can't get your son to stop being aggressive and rude and mean, how are you going to help a boy in Colombia or Brazil who's got major issues with machismo? Right? So I think, for me, it's a full circle conversation. And yeah, you might have come for one thing, but I hope you left with a lot more than you expected. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter whether you're working in a church or you're working building bridges in Engineers Without Borders, or you're working at an NGO. Like we are the solution. We are the ones that are going to make a difference. I get up every day and I say, if today was the day I died, I know I did what I was meant to do. But part of doing this hard work is also having conversations with yourself about where am I cutting corners? Where am I taking the easy route? Where am I not telling myself the truth about what this work requires? And then how can I build on my resiliency? Because the world needs me. I'm not walking away from this work. And you are not walking away from this work. None of us are. So we just got to figure it out. Okay.